What is poppin'? It is a Slapton. I'm but a lowly Slapton riding these refi waves, and this is This Week in ReFi, where we give you all of the refi news that is fit to go ape wild over. Of course, with me is the man with the plan, the man with the waning yet perpetual summer tan, the Estonian madman, Sir Rez.
It's me. Hello.
It is, in fact, you, and we have two very special and distinguished guests. We have Sue, the monosyllabic, but hopefully, definitely polymathic, and perhaps polyrhythmic Sue, the Forest Project Coordinator at Open Forest Protocol.
Indeed. Happy to be here. Thanks for having us on.
Hello.
And we have the Troll Bane, and we'll get into that, the Product Developer Lead for Open Forest Protocol, Luke.
Hey, y'all. Good to see you.
Very exciting stuff. We're going to get into Open Forest Protocol deep dive today. We will talk about how Luke destroys trolls, or at least manages them. We have all sorts of things to talk about. And before we get into that, I would be remiss if I did not draw your attention to the best job board in all of ReFi. Of course, I am talking about refijobs.com. Free to join, curated. Go get that. Become one of us, do well and good at the same time, and maybe we'll see you here one day talking about refi stuff. Okay, the $1 million, well, there's a bunch of $1 million questions. Before we get into the $1 million questions, actually, I want to know your backstories. Let's start with Sue. Sue, how did you get into to this space? What was your journey? What would you like to share about that?
Sure. So I've actually been sharing the ReFi job board with people and telling this story a little bit because people think that to be working in crypto, to be working in ReFi, you have to have some sort of background that makes you like somehow technologically capable of doing it. That was not at all the case for me. So I was brought on because I had a friend who is the co-founder of Open Forest Protocol. He needed somebody with some kind of environmental background. I studied environmental science. My background is in restoration, ecology, research, stuff like that. And he was like, "Hey, do you want to learn everything about crypto and then just start running this business development?" So like I think that's something that is really great, is that I had a good amount of ecological knowledge that has made my job a lot easier. But I really just came into this 2 years ago. I just kind of started. We're starting the company all kind of collectively from the ground up. So everyone was kind of learning at the same time with me. So I was thrown into the deep end, you could say. So I have a background in ecology, and then just went right into it. And I found the space to be really welcoming.
Your story, I've heard time and time again. I'm also very similar. Rez, I think you are as well. This is a space that swallows you whole. Nobody, it seems, intended to be here, and then once you get in, you can't get out. It's just like the gravity of 1,000 dwarf suns or something like that. So definitely can relate. Also, Sue, follow-up question. How many times have you been misgendered because of your screen name?
Regularly, to the point sometimes I self-identify as a boy named Sue from the Johnny Cash song, but it's 2022, you can call me whatever.
Love it. And Luke, what is your journey? What is your background? How did you get here?
I just want to add a little bit there because Sue also was the chief meme smith for Near's, I think, entire community arm for a solid period of time. So he is a little bit more degen than he makes himself out to be.
Love it.
But I got into this. I think my first introduction to blockchain technology was whenever I was in college. I went to a lecture in like 2014, 2015. And a professor was talking about blockchain, and I was like, "Oh, that's kind of neat." And after the thing, we had like a little happy hour, and I was talking to some other students, and I met this guy who had gotten kicked out of his house for mining Bitcoin because he jacked up the electric bill so high because he was running all these Bitcoin early mining rigs, and he was looking for someone to take him in exchange for Bitcoin. Obviously, I turned him down at the time because who knew anything about that, and life is full of regrets, but. It was a very instrumental kind of moment in showing how disruptive blockchain can be for me. And it's always kind of piqued my interest in then. So I've been kind of dancing around technology. What was that?
Wait, blockchain is disruptive because it got somebody kicked out of their house? That's amazing.
People say that things are disruptive, right? And that kind of, it's a word in your mind, but until you see it physically displace someone from their home and upset an entire house full of people, I don't know, that for me was a very visual example of kind of what this can do. Obviously, there's amazing and a million other better use cases for the disruptive nature of blockchain. But yeah, that was kind of my first introduction to it.
I love it.
And always been interested in it since. And so I was also in Scouts, so I love the outdoors, I love nature. And when Open Forest Protocol kind of came along, it was just a match made in heaven. I was working in sustainable commercial real estate at that time, doing financial modeling there, and I was, in my spare time teaching myself how to code smart contracts and reading books about blockchain, and so yeah, whenever the opportunity came around, it just was a match made in heaven.
Very cool. Always interesting to hear people's journey. I'm also in real estate. I do real estate investing, so it's very interesting.
Awesome.
I have yet to meet someone actually in this space from a real estate background. Very cool stuff. So now here's the $1 million question, maybe the $1 trillion question. I don't know what's bigger than $1 trillion. This is like the most loaded question, right? What is Open Forest Protocol? Luke, would you probably be the most comfortable as the project or product design lead, right? Like, how would you describe this to someone who had no knowledge of it? What would be like an elevator pitch of it?
Yeah. So some might say we bring truth to trees, but I think a really easy way to understand it is that there's mass deforestation occurring around the world. Right. In the last 30 years, we've lost. I'm from Texas. We've lost like 2 Texases worth of trees globally. It's an astounding. The actual square kilometer hectare number is astoundingly high. The rate isn't slowing down. It's causing all of these big issues. So if we look at what's causing those problems, the deforestation, typically it's financial reasons. Typically, trees are getting cut down for agriculture, for cattle raising, very legitimate reasons that people are needing to convert those land uses into different things for survivability. And this is happening all around the world. So there's no moral judgment assigned to that. But the fact remains that there are financial reasons that are leading to the mass deforestation around this world. And so what Open Forest Protocol does is it provides a platform to help establish that foundation that you can then get financial support to continue to plant and operate a forest. We provide a super transparent and free to use platform for monitoring and reporting what's going on your forest. And then through that platform, you can get access to other types of financial tools to help support the activities that you're doing on the ground.
That was very well said. So, and Rez and I were discussing this prior to this call, saying, we were trying to wrap our head around it. And I was on a call yesterday with you, or you had a call where you had basically explaining your platform. Is it fair to say that right now the mission, the goal, the focus is just on that MRV portion, and you will iterate or build off of that once that's established? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've built at this point, I won't get too much into the details. I don't know if we're at that point yet. But what we've built at this point is essentially a DMRV system, decentralized measurement, reporting, and verification system that enables individual people who own or manage a forest project to basically take photos and tree measurements and provide statistically significant measurements and reporting of what's going on within their forest project. Report that and have that validated by a big decentralized group of basically data auditors, not so much blockchain validators, but data auditors who are looking at this data. If you're familiar with the carbon credit industry or the voluntary carbon market, kind of similar to VVBs, verification validation bodies. So basically, we have this system where anybody who has a forest project can come on, they can register their forest in a blockchain-based system where all data that enters this system is completely transparent and accessible to anybody in the world, really. And then that data is then verified by a decentralized group of these validators. So that's the core of what we built right now. And then, we can talk about kind of where that goes from there.
Cool. So the couple things that I wanted to bring up that I saw yesterday, one is you have an app, right? And what was the name of the app?
The Forester app.
Forester app. And a couple cool things that you displayed about it. One is that it's geo-fenced, meaning that if you were to verify something in Guyana from where I live in like New York City, that would not fly because the phone knows that I am not at the place, right? Which is a really cool feature, right? Kind of builds trust. And the other thing that I really liked about it, one of the things that I knew you guys were real and I liked the way you thought, was you said it's as simple as possible. Right. It by design, it was supposed to be rudimentary. It was supposed to be a one-way transfer of information. And so can you speak a little bit about why that's important? I know that's super important, but why did you do it that way? Why is that important?
Totally. So I can kind of use a little bit of our blockchain background to explain that. So we designed OFP. Michael Kelly was our chief architect. And so he is very much the one that kind of laid this all out. But the main purpose that we tried to achieve by designing OFP was to create a general purpose environmental data oracle, specifically for trees right now. But you can kind of see in any data oracle, the flow of information is super, super critical. If we're looking at Chainlink, if we're looking at any of that, we need to be able to have outside information in the world be connected to a blockchain and then have that information verified, or at least super secure, right? Having weather data fed into the blockchain or things like that. So that is sort of what we tried to do with the app. We wanted to create a system where it was very difficult to falsify the data. That's why we have the geofenced photos. So you can't take photos outside of the project area that's established on a really like a web app dashboard. We can get to that later. It's a separate product. But yeah, it's just a really simple, straightforward way of securely collecting that data and making it so that way, whenever those data auditors or those validators are looking at that information, they're pretty certain that that information was in fact collected in the geographic area that the projects are claiming to have been collecting it at.
Roger that. And the other thing that was really cool was, I believe the data is collected every 6 months originally. There are stages, and then every year after a certain point. Can you speak to how that is typically collected? That sort of data is typically collected now. At what lengths compared to the 6 months in 1 year? If I'm monitoring a forest, let's say.
Yeah. Well, something important too, because MRV is so typically intricately tied to the carbon sort of system, right? We're putting out a really good paper pretty shortly on MRV and kind of the history of that, going back to like COP13, right? And when that was sort of initialized by the UN. But the MRV typically goes in tandem with carbon accreditation methodologies. You have a rule book that says, okay, here's this project. They're going to do this type of project activity. We're going to quantify the carbon in this way. And here's how we're going to measure that and make sure that that is actually happening, validate it, right? So what we wanted to do was kind of look at that system and see how we can improve it. As it exists right now, due to very real cost restrictions, typically, and I might, I'm fairly certain this is what I see most of all in the documentation. In actual implementation, this might vary, of course, from project to project, but typically project data is validated by third-party validators every 5 years or so. At least that's the maximum amount of time that projects can go by to not have their project validated by these third parties. We wanted to reduce that because yes, yeah, exactly. And I'm also speaking primarily about forest-based carbon accreditation programs. And so if you look at Verra, Red Plus, any CDM methodologies about these carbon methodologies, then yeah, that's 5 years is typically around the time at which those projects are supposed to be validated. And so we wanted to shorten that timeline because we can, and because we think that provides a much clearer picture of what's going on the ground, and it provides much more trust and an accurate, truthful depiction of what's happening there. So we've shortened it. So the first kind of 4 years or 4 stages that projects are uploading data, we segment Open Forest Protocol by stages. The first 4 stages are 6 months long, and then you record data every year after that. So projects are uploading data once every 6 months for the first 4 periods there, and then once per year after that. And so it in part works with blockchain smart contracts. It makes it really easy to have those very clearly set periods there, but it also, we think, is going to be able to provide a much clearer picture of what's happening on the ground, and also have a really big benefit for the projects there, because that can inspire a lot more investor confidence than might be otherwise with a 5-year checkup.
Yeah, because in 5 years, in that time, a lot can happen. You could have deforestation, you could have a fire, you could have natural events, right? So I do believe that time frame by being shortened is very, if you can do it, why not do it? So let's say, I go into my backyard. I have a bunch of trees. They're tagged. They have little IDs on them. I am gathering information with my app. The app is going to say, sample these trees. I'm going to say the height. I'm going to say the diameter. I'm going to take a picture of them. Now, the thing that is interesting to me is, how does that get validated? Who are, essentially this VB, this verification body? Like, who are they? How does that happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we, at this point, have 3 main products that are out and live right now. So we have the project operator dashboard. Project operators are the forest project developers or managers. And that dashboard is something you'd access on a computer that connects directly to the blockchain. And that's one of 2 products that connects directly to the blockchain here. The mobile app doesn't touch the blockchain. It can work remotely, doesn't need to really connect to internet service except to download and upload data. But you can take measurements offline and whatnot. The validators use what we call the validator dashboard. It's a separate product that also plugs into the blockchain. The near blockchain, probably relevant. I don't know if we've said that yet. We're built on near protocol. So big shout out. But the validators are organizations, a variety of organizations that we've onboarded. I don't have an exact number. Stu, let me know if you have a better number. But I think it's around 20 at this point. Yeah, perfect. So we have a variety of organizations that some of them are existing VVBs that work with Verra and Gold Standard. So they have a list of about 20 organizations all around the world that are used for that data auditing of project data every 5 years. So we have a few of those as validators. We also have remote sensing companies, environmental engineering companies. We're onboarding university programs, things like that. So we bring in lots of these qualified individuals who have an interest in monitoring these types of projects and validating this kinds of data. And the structure in which we've built to have them all make an evaluative decision is based a lot on prediction markets like Augur or Flux Protocol, if you're familiar with those. So basically you have, in decentralized fashion, you have a bunch of people and you need them to make a decision. Is this data legitimate or not? And so we've essentially created a sort of model of a games theory economic system to help all of those decentralized actors reach consensus on what is the decision about this data upload from this specific project at this point in time.
Right. And so one of the things, because you're tagging these trees, I'm going to focus on trees because I think it's the most tangible and the easiest to wrap your head around. I know there's other things, agroforestry and stuff like that. So the validator, therefore, could take a look at the data that's being transmitted. And one of the things they could make a decision on is the continuity of the data, right? So they see the tree being measured in these stages, and now it's a year later. If it was significantly taller or looked significantly different, we would have an idea that there was malingering going on. Is that an accurate statement?
Great word.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Malingering. Yes.
Exactly.
Lapton keeps coming in with interesting words.
I read dictionaries before I do these. Yeah. So now here's another question. Rez and I did a deep dive on methodologies last episode because we thought it was important, and also because we thought it would be important to ask you these questions. You can verify that the tree is there. You can verify, let's say, that it has a certain height and girth and all this. Now, what about things like additionality? What about things like leakage? What about things like permanence? Is that in your purview right now? Or are you basically saying, hey, we're just doing the recording, that's going to be left for some other entity or another aspect of this?
Precisely, yeah. So when we start thinking about additionality and permanence and leakage and baseline scenarios and all that good stuff, that's when we start talking about carbon accreditation and carbon methodologies. So in the future, if OFP was to be providing that kind of a service, we would be incorporating that into any consideration, any accreditation here for on-chain issued carbon credits. Right now, though, what we're focused on is just the core monitoring aspect of it. We want to get that part right. We want to make sure that the technology works. We want to make sure that it is very easy and globally accessible, because it's hard to create a tool set for an entire global population, because we have projects, Joe could probably talk all over the world. But yeah, exactly. If we were to be doing that, it would be in line with the existing standards with like Verra or the CDM, incorporating barrier assessments, things like that, or for additionality assessments. So that stuff's super, super important, and it ties into the global kind of VCM market in large. So yeah.
And so in terms of these methodologies, in terms of the recording and measurement, those methodologies outside of the fact that you're doing it more often, are those methodologies pulled from Verra and ACR? Have you created, how did you come up with those methodologies for recording?
Yeah, it's a good question. We would most likely be using the theoretical best practices of whatever's out there right now. So I don't think that OFP is necessarily looking to reinvent the wheel right now. I know a lot of people in the ReFi space have some very creative and very interesting and legitimate ideas about different aspects and components of the voluntary carbon market, like additionality and things like that. But I don't know if we would be necessarily diverting or moving with that. So I think at this point, it is uncertain, and we're just trying to focus on onboarding forest projects and making sure that we have a tool set for recording forest data and accurately kind of measuring what's going on that works for them.
Yeah, we had a whole episode breaking down methodologies and what additionality, permanence, and leakage means in the last episode. So great to tie that in. About these
it was
validators. Yeah.
what was that, Rez?
About these validators. So you mentioned that you have over 20 validators onboarded into the system. What do their incentives look like? What makes them want to participate in the system?
It's a great question. It ties into our crypto economic model. So as with all decentralized systems, rather than having a centralized boss that tells you what to do, you provide financial incentives to encourage ecosystem participants to do what you want them to do. So we have a native cryptocurrency asset called the OPN token, Open Token. And that token is basically a utility and governance token. It's used both to stake on decisions about the data uploads, so like affirmative or denying decisions on the data uploads. It's also used for governance and things like that. So validators are rewarded in these tokens for their decisions to validate this project data. And the token is then, and so that's in essence kind of the financial model for them. We provide for some validators an initial amount of tokens to begin with, and then from there, anything that they gain or claim afterwards is theirs to keep. So that's the system that we have in place right now. It's not too dissimilar from other kind of data prediction market models and things like that.
Okay, so it's a prediction market type of model. How do people cash out?
Okay, so how they cash out basically is just how you cash out anything. We're a part of the Near community, Near ecosystem, and so that would be kind of where that goes there. But the value of the OPN token is through the utility token, but there's also really cool things that we can do with that, right? Like we built this ecosystem to be one that can scale. We're going to be open sourcing all of our code, and we want people to be able to build new types of things on top of this, right? So with OFP, we basically give anybody in the world this base code for an environmental data oracle with a preset group of decentralized qualified validators to evaluate this environmental data. So if someone wants to come in and build let's say a mangrove vertical on OFP, for example, a mangrove carbon methodology vertical that takes the existing code for our dashboard and for the validation and just plugs in a data upload to the validation and then has some token mint contract to create carbon credits off of that, that's totally foreseeable. That is totally feasible within the structure of what we built. And that's something that we want to encourage people to do. So there's what we wanted to do, most importantly for all of this, besides providing this platform that's free to use, that's what it is, for forest projects, is to enable other people that want to leverage what we've already built to create new and interesting tools. So an important note too is that with the validators, the reason we issue the token is because this makes it free to use for any forest projects, because we have this independent crypto economic model that doesn't rely on fees or anything paid in by the forest projects that are doing the monitoring themselves.
Mm-hmm. So I guess a potential use case would essentially be actually perhaps being a source of data for a bunch of carbon projects on different methodologies, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it would be 100% a thing that could be used for. You could also build a carbon dex off of this. You could build any sort of refi project that you could possibly think of using our code and plugging into the ecosystem. And we have a massive, thriving, awesome ecosystem filled with really cool, smart people. So yeah, I'm excited to see where the growth trajectory goes. But we're right now just focusing on laying that foundation and making sure that it is something that is easily scalable.
All right.
Very cool.
Follow-up question.
Yeah.
So, being a person that does come from a data background, I have this question of when we're talking about data, what does being a data oracle mean? So are these like tons of carbon per hectare, or is this, the picture is legitimate, or is this picture represents this much carbon, or like what is the output essentially of the system is what I'm asking.
Great question. So there's some really cool remote sensing organizations right now that are doing some really interesting work on creating maps that tell you exactly how much carbon is in a certain pixel on a GIS map or something like that. So we've been looking into integrating remote sensing data to aid in validation and verification of project data. But at this point, what the data output is just very, very basic. It's the fundamental component that leads to everything else. And it is tree measurements. So tree height, tree diameter, and photos of living proof of certain trees within specific sample plots. So we don't require photos and the measurements of trees throughout all of the forest. That's not super scalable.
Yes.
We provide sampling plots according to CDM methodologies that are statistically significant. And then we require the projects to go and measure tree data at those specific sample plots. So, if we were to be doing carbon, basically you would just pull that measurements, plug them into some allometric equations or biomass expansion factors, and then through a few discount factors, you'd be able to get the carbon output, or at least the average carbon sequestered per hectare. And then because it's validated on a year-on-year basis, you'd be able to see that progression year on year and have that be verified. So the validators are purely just verifying at this point that the trees are alive and that the measurements that the projects are recording are within the statistical mean of what should be expected. Right? We have that growth trajectory. We map that out for them in the software that we built for them. So they're able to see the rates of change year on year between the tree measurements that are reported by the projects. And they're able to push back and question if any of those seem suspect.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So that's
it also
kind of
has a really cool side effect of creating very large, nice data sets over time that could be publicly accessible and that could allow even better modeling, even for the same kind of remote sensing companies that we have trying to figure out how do you generate a good carbon estimate purely from looking at it from space, which is an ongoing, actually very hard question, and tends to be different depending on the type of tree, for instance. So your model, needs to keep that in mind, and that gets very difficult if you don't have these kind of open on-the-ground measurements. I love it.
Precisely, yeah. Local growth conditions are critical in training those algorithms, and so and that's kind of why like the remote sensing stuff. It's great. It's amazing. We see the trend lines bringing the cost of that and the accessibility of that closer to what individual projects can afford, but it's not quite there right now. I mean, these services, this imagery, it's typically still very expensive. And also it's if you're not trained properly, if the data isn't trained, if you don't have good data sets, then it's not super accurate. So yeah, it's definitely. We saw that the ground data was just so important in this world right now, and we really wanted to create an accessible way of accessing that and verifying that.
Yeah, cool. I'm reminded of this good old data science axiom that you can't improve what you don't measure. So fundamentally,
nice.
Fundamentally, you can't have good models without good on-the-ground data. This is functionally a very important core part of how we even get good satellite-based estimations.
Totally.
Yeah,
Rez,
very
I
cool.
like that you mentioned on the ground. I'm going to get Sue in on this because you deal with people who are on the ground as the coordinator of projects. First question I have for you is maybe let's start here. What does it mean to be a project coordinator? Like, what is your role? I've seen this and it might be esoteric knowledge. What would you share? What does your life look like? What is your day-to-day? What is your job responsibility?
Sure. It's pretty mellow, man. No, I'm just kidding. It's a lot of what we do is communication because I mean a lot of people in ReFi find that these things like biomass expansion factors are not super intuitive for people. So, there's a lot of what we're explaining that needs to, we take people from all over the world, from all different backgrounds. They're united by being forest managers of some kind. And we explain it to them. So it's not just me. There's a team. We've got people who speak French, people who speak Spanish. So we're bringing on hopefully someone soon who speaks Portuguese. And then we're going to get, we need somebody to represent kind of all of Asia. So we're trying to get just hubs that can speak to the largest percentage of people that we can reach and communicate it as clearly as possible. So a lot of my day is calls with people explaining what's going on. And then right now, what's been taking up a lot of my time, and this is what's probably most exciting for people kind of watching where we're at in terms of our progress, is that we're actively onboarding forest projects. that requires them to create a near wallet. It requires them to go through our dashboard. So as of right now, we're building out more streamlined versions of this because really scalability when in all things climate is the most important thing. But for right now, it's very much like it's a technical process, and we're there along the way, kind of helping them out. So you can think of what we do as just the point person between the technology and the people on the ground. So just kind of connecting those two.
How many projects?
Go ahead,
Sorry. Go ahead.
Who pays the people on the ground? So, like, there are these validators that confirm these measurements that the people on the ground make. Then there's the projects themselves who operate an area. So, is it the projects themselves that then go on the ground and measure, or is this like a third group that you're mediating in this platform?
Good question. It's the projects themselves, and that's a really key thing to understand about what we're doing. And I think it really gets at kind of the Web3 ethos of you're controlling your data, you're an active participant. If you juxtapose this with like the legacy system, you're like, okay, here's my forest, like, please give me a good answer, scientist. Like you have no, a lot of times it's kind of like Kafka-esque, I hate to say it, but you're just like sitting, waiting, like maybe in 2 years, like my $100,000 is going to give me carbon credits. And you just like, it's a system that is extremely frustrating for people. So what we're doing is we're saying, no upfront cost. You go out, you do the measurements yourself. You monitor the progress of your validation. The credits go directly, the theoretical outcomes of whatever you're doing will go directly to your wallet. And so that there's really this sense of being an active stakeholder in your own project. And then that way it's also extremely cost saving because we don't have to fly out teams to do these measurements. People do the in situ measurements themselves, and they get validated through the validation model that Luke was explaining.
Yeah, and the validation model keeps the projects honest. So there's this difficult problem generally when you have on-the-ground measurement done by the project because they have potentially really high incentives to inflate the numbers as much as they can get away with.
Exactly. And so this is another just clear Web3 innovation, which is that it's been so expensive to get that level of certainty historically because and so we have this network that Luke's saying of validators all over the world. If a validator that focuses on like East Asia gets an upload from Mexico, like they're just gonna be like, okay, well, I don't have expertise in that area. I'm not gonna fly my satellites out there. I'm not gonna do it. But when we have this network, we have the network effects, and everything is way cheaper. It's an opt-in, opt-out system for validators, and that way we're able to keep costs as low as possible. Which is, as we said right at the beginning, simplicity, accessibility. That's really the key to OFP.
Yeah.
And I saw the demo yesterday. Another cool thing that I liked was, we're talking about agency here, essentially, is that these projects now have agency over the recording and verification and monitoring of their projects. And a really cool thing was that it truly is democratized because if you trust me as a project manager, you could invite me to do that for you. I believe it was like through an email. You just get like an email and then you can do it. So like if you have a project in where you are, I won't dox you, and I was to fly there, I could then do the use the app to generate the data. So it's there isn't gated behind any sort of system, right? As long as you grant me permission, I can do it.
Precisely. And that's actually another... Oh, go ahead, Luke.
Yeah, I sorry, Joe. I just wanted to add one cool thing too is that to add on to what Joe was saying, we're also adding in the ability to delegate validators. So if you have OPN tokens, which are the utility token that is used to validate project data, you can delegate that to other people that might not necessarily have that many or any OPN tokens in order to validate data. So let's say that you have a project in the remotest part of the Congo Basin or the Amazon, and you wanted to delegate your OPN tokens to a indigenous community that does project validation for OFP. That is 100% something that you can do. And then those people that are doing that on the ground validation or whatever validation they're doing, they receive the vast majority of the rewards for that kind of work. So it's kind of a way that we've created a system in which we can share the rewards that are generated if we want to.
Love it. So follow up for you, Sue, is could you like give us an overview of some projects on the tip of your mind? Like just who are these projects? What are they doing? Where are they?
Sure. Yeah, happy to give a brief overview. So we have Luke and I were debating whether we say 29 or 30 projects because 29 is technically a smaller number, but it sounds more accurate. So
You're
we
right.
have we have 30 projects that have joined at this point. And so it's really important. People have been asking us for numbers, and it's kind of difficult because depending on how you kind of tranche them together, you'll get different results. But 30 projects is all of the projects that have gone through, gotten registered, and are getting ready to do their first upload. So there's more projects that are kind of in the pipeline. There's some projects that are really small, some that are really big, but 30 is a nice round number that we have for how many projects have joined so far. There are I'll highlight a few of them that did beta testing with us because I've talked to them really extensively. So one, Serena, she does, I'll just say Serena, so I don't dox her, but she's an NFT artist. She works in the near community, so she's super crypto native. She's got 30 hectares of oak reforestation in Tuscany, and she's like, let's try this out. Let's test out the technology. She came from the Cryptosphere. Then we're working with a group, Friends of Usambara. They've got hundreds of thousands of hectares in Tanzania. Most of these projects start with a pilot, so they're not doing all of them right at once. But they have been actively reforesting the Usambara region, which has been like totally deforested in Tanzania. And so that is like a community-run project. And then we've got they're doing active reforestation. Another one we've got this guy Augustine that we're working with out in Liberia. He's putting together a massive conservation project. So these are different people from different kind of technological backgrounds, different aims. Some people want to do reforestation. Some people want to do conservation. So we have the thing that kind of brings them all together is that they are people. Oftentimes they've been frustrated by the process of the legacy system to try to, get their MRV needs met. But ultimately they're people who want to just showcase the good work they're doing. And they recognize that this end-to-end project verification that is available through blockchain is going to just give them with, any number of future scenarios they're looking for. They know that having that baseline is just going to help them with communicating with stakeholders, things like that.
And another thing Rez and I have discussed previously is with the legacy system, if you're under a certain amount, if your project is of not certain scale, it doesn't become economically even viable for you to do it. So, you could, in theory, have 10 plants in your backyard. This is free. This is open to use. Now you have a system that you can use. It's not going to cost you an arm and a leg to fill out. So are you seeing projects of smaller scale also glomming on to your protocol?
Certainly. In fact, our original slide decks we made were like, we're built for small and medium-sized projects because that's such an immediate use case we can imagine because so many people have been frustrated. We're finding actually that, like Friends with Sambara, for instance, we've got these massive plots that it works just fine. So like we're built really for everybody, but we definitely recognize the special use case. So we've got so a few permaculture projects in India, some Miyawaki projects. I don't know. I guess you guys probably know Miyawaki by now, but it's when you plant really dense stands of trees, you accelerate succession, things like that. So we've got probably 10 projects that are fewer than 10, 15 hectares. So, and that is really novel in the space as far as we can tell, just because of all of the things we talked about before, which is the expense of validation, data collection, all those things. So by cutting those costs, we're really bringing in these stakeholders that have historically been left out of the system.
And if you are a project, a smaller project, bigger project, what's the best way to get a hold of you specifically? Or how do you get involved in the system? What would be the way that you'd recommend people to start getting involved?
Sure. So we've got a website. I jokingly said Discord because I'm a Luddite when it comes to that. But I would say, just go. I mean, you can email me, Joe at Open Forest Protocol. But the way to do it, you just go to our website, you go to projects, get started, fill out an information. And then I'll probably email you within 24 hours.
Oh, nice. That reminds me. I need to read my email for this week.
You're going to get an email from Juanita. Inside
All
joke.
caps.
Yeah, so very cool, very cool. And I also agree that putting a specific non-round number, like if you want to make up a statistic, like 67% of people eat cheese. If I said 70%, nobody would believe me. 67, I'm credible. Who'd be crazy enough to come up with that crooked number, All right, Rez, any other I think we've dug pretty deep. Rez, do you have any more questions, anything you want to dig at? I know you do. This is what you do.
Actually, no. Like, I really love this project. It feels very nicely scoped, well defined, and as a product person myself, I'm always like, if somebody defines something that is like nicely scoped, I go, that's pleasurable.
Yeah,
So it's like
Good product
it's
design,
a
right?
it's a real problem. I can confirm it's a very real problem, and the implications of it are numerous. One of them is that yes, for small projects, it probably will never start making sense to have specialized people go on the ground just so they could make on the ground measurements. If you have small projects, just the cost of coming out there might eat your entire margin if you're doing a carbon project, for example. This is part of it. The second part of it is just the fact that our current way we're doing MRV is very how do I put this? It's very top heavy. It has a lot going on. And fundamentally, what Open Forest Protocol seems to do is a lot of trust making in the validity of the data, which as a data scientist, by training, I'm always like, clean data. That's my favorite kind. We have this good term of garbage in, garbage out. You just like, if you don't have clean data, you basically just don't have anything. And on top of this, all of this being public or publicly accessible, just means over time, we're gonna get better remote sensing models that actually tell the truth. And we have something to compare against. And we can go like, yes, your model is fine, but it performs worse than this other one in this like generalized nice data set we now have. And all of those things are, in my opinion, super cool. I love it.
We're gonna cut that, and that's gonna be the first OFP advertisement. It's just gonna be like res approved.
Yeah, Rez
you guys
approved.
have done it. You have done the impossible. You have satisfied Rez and his critiques of projects. This is amazing. This is amazing.
Yeah.
Rez and I always talk about scope. We always talk about project scope. I know how much and I believe in that too. And that's how I knew you guys were real. You had a very specific focus. You understood the importance of simplicity and adoption. So yeah, also very impressed. All right, so one other thing I want to talk about, we had mentioned this off air, and you had mentioned this yesterday on your stream, was a working group for standardizing carbon credits. Is that something that you'd be comfortable getting into? I'm assuming that's public knowledge.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned you had a working group with Toucan, Klima, I believe, Regen Network, maybe some other entities, and you were working on a standardized carbon credit. What does that mean? How would you explain that to a novice, a layman?
Totally. So if we think about how cryptocurrency assets are currently kind of transacted and created really, and then transacted, it's essentially just a smart contract that has a set of rules that allows you to do certain things with the token. And it gives it certain identity features, right? It tells you what type of token this is, how many there are. If it's a non-fungible token, it'll give you a little bit more information, like maybe link to an IPFS link for a JPEG, as a lot of people like to meme. But essentially with carbon, what we're seeing right now, and this is kind of where the conversation started, was that we were talking with a really, really cool project called Synkin, headed up by Adrian in Berlin. And Synkin is a great marketplace for carbon credits. And they kind of bridge the Web3 side. And they're one of the many platforms that do this, that bridge the Web3 side to the Web2 side, providing Web3 carbon markets to maybe more traditional corporate purchasers of those carbon credits. So there's a very real problem that exists there, where if he doesn't have a backend capable of handling a bunch of different tokens, all with different smart contracts, all with different identity features, different functions, things like that, it's going to be really hard for him to create a kind of menu board for these purchasers of carbon credits to see what are the different credits that he has, what are the different tokens that he has. So we realized like it would be really, really helpful if we just had a unified carbon token standard where we can have a shared data set, shared data attributes for each token, shared functions, and essentially create like a ERC 721 standard or whatever token standard you want to pick for carbon tokens. So we've begun it. We're about, maybe like 4 or 5 months into it. We have a lot of wonderful people. We got everybody from Regen and Klima, Toucan, Flow Carbon, D-Climate. Yeah, so we've had a few people even from IPFS that are joining in and helping out. There's a million others that I Carbon5 that I'd love to name. But we're essentially just trying to figure out does it take, and how would we be able to create a shared understanding of this carbon token? Because we realized in the Web3 space, we have a tremendous opportunity. A lot of people talk about different protocols as being competing, but I don't really know if that's necessarily the best way to explain it, because we're all kind of experiments, right? Nobody's really gotten to that point of like critical, insane success where we are the globally adopted, nobody's really made it to that point. It's still so new. And so because we're all just kind of experimenting with different approaches here, it makes sense for us to collaborate in order to scale the space collectively, to make sure that we can all work together and make sure that we can interoperate and have this kind of shared fundamental base system. So that's really the focus of that group at this point. And it's we're trying. Sometimes we get sidetracked with questions about like do we include additionality and things like that. But it's still a very important issue that I'm hoping we can be able to resolve at some point. But yeah, that's basically that in a nutshell.
Cool. And we're talking about like a standard. I mean, you're talking about the information that would it be like information inherent to the token, where you could look at, I know that you're talking about the interplanetary file system, right? That's the decentralized storage system. And so you could put, let's say, an NFT that has a certain data in it about vintage and methodology. Is that kind of what we mean by a standardized carbon token?
Precisely. So when we look at the gold standard versus Verra registries, those are the traditional carbon accreditation bodies. I think Verra uses country for their location as an attribute, and gold standard uses region. It's a really basic example, but it's a good indication that there are still discrepancies between these these registry standards, where whenever you purchase a carbon credit from one of those registries, they're all publicly available. You can see the different data attributes there, but they all vary and they're very different. And even that small discrepancy can lead to some problems whenever we're trying to create a super user-friendly, accessible marketplace sort of system. So we're just trying to create a shared, both taxonomical, like having the same vocabulary for these tokens, but also just a shared token standard that has similar functions, right? Do we include a retirement function on the carbon credit, or is that something that's registry specific? So just kind of coming to terms with what we can do to increase different ReFi protocol interoperability is really the goal of that working group right there.
Yep. When it comes to data accessibility in carbon registries, that's a fascinating rabbit hole. For context, there are quite a few organizations around the world who, for instance, hire armies of interns to go over Verra these project documents and essentially hand annotate huge data sets. This is just a side effect of this data not being structured and not being accessible in the first place.
So if you're looking to get into ReFi, there's your foot in the door, or refijobs.com. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I just wanted to, you're absolutely, both of you are totally right. I would be remiss if I didn't say that there has already been a lot of great work done with the Interwork Alliance, IWA, and BICO WG as well on this issue. So we're just kind of trying to create a more specific implementation, and yeah, that's what we're doing there.
Very cool. So very awesome stuff. This is This Week in ReFi. We would be remiss if we didn't cover a few stories. Let's do two. You guys up for two? We'll do the most fun of the stories we had curated. I want to get your opinions on this. John Oliver made the rounds in the ReFi space. He made a scathing, critical take on, I think it was just carbon markets voluntary carbon markets in general, yes. Right? On his show. What's his show called? The Make Fun of Things show? What is it?
Last Week Tonight.
Last Week Tonight. Yeah. Okay, so Verra clapped back, as the kids would say. They put out an announcement in which they said, "Hey, John Oliver, here's why you're wrong." Have we all read this? Have you guys all read this or seen it or know about it?
Well, LinkedIn post about it.
Okay, that's fair. I want to get your opinions on it. Sue, what is your opinion on? Did you see the John Oliver piece in particular?
Yeah, I saw the piece.
What are your thoughts on that?
So I remember there was a part where he was like making fun of the balloon guy. And I think that like there's of course so much to make fun of when it comes to doing the logic of offsets for massive corporations. And that's like, there's a lot to critique there. And I think you got a lot of that right. But what I've been focusing on with what we're doing, at least with OFP, is that like, there is institutional money that like oil companies and people who are actively destroying the world want to put it into environmental work. And from my side, I see a lot of forest projects that really need some funds to make that happen. And if you can accurately measure carbon sequestration, then you kind of close that loop and you create actually really powerful tools for change. And I think that was kind of, I think that there was so much like kind of sarcasm and like there was so sardonic and just like there was this sense of negativity about the whole thing. But it's like if you really sit down and think about it, the problems are in the data and not necessarily in the logic of the system. The system actually does work nicely, but it's laughable now because the data is so bad. So I mean, I'm not sure exactly what Vera said about that, but I still think that and this is something that if you just accept that we're in late capitalism, accept that this is the way that society functions, people respond to economic incentives. I would like to see more of this. I would like to see more tokenization of environmental behavior. If you could tokenize plastic collection, like I mean, I don't like the logic of offsets, but I like to be able to say I'm a company and I've drawn down 10 tons of plastic or whatever you say. So that's not a super specific critique of the video, but I think that a lot of people don't really think through the logic and they just think like, oh, well, people are polluting the earth and doing offsets. And I think the logic of drawdowns that we're thinking through actually is quite a consistent enterprise.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the way we get out of climate change is either an economic solution or it's a political solution. So, like, those are the big ways we can affect things at scale right now. It doesn't necessarily often feel like the political solution is moving anywhere near fast enough.
Yeah.
The second thing is just, John Oliver's criticism of the voluntary carbon market was like relatively valid. I could say, but it was just it's sort of how I've seen mainstream journalists package criticism of the carbon market that just rubs me the wrong way over and over again. And it's you check out any mainstream article about carbon credits, they always kind of have this similar kind of structure of how they criticize the voluntary carbon market. There are these specific examples of past failures that somehow seem to confirm that everything's bullshit forever. And it's just like I got really annoyed at this, and then I made I made a tweet which basically said something like, wheels are a failed concept. They struggle on uneven terrain. They get stuck in mud. If wheels didn't exist, we wouldn't have city people with SUVs. Improvement is hopeless. Let's just all die,
Yeah, it's a dichotomy, right? If it's not perfect, we have to scrap it. And
yes,
yeah, I think that's a fair
exactly
point.
Because trying, it feels like trying and like maybe like not measuring up is somehow actively like incredibly bad while not doing anything, which is the status quo at the end of the day. Like just ignoring the problem entirely, this is somehow considered normal. So then we have this option of like, yeah, you could try, but you're essentially a villain immediately. Or you could just ignore the problem and somehow it'll get solved on its own. And I think it's really irresponsible when journalists package these kind of discussions in this kind of wording of just going, all improvement is impossible. Examples from 15 years ago where things were done a lot worse are very valid and are valid right now and will never stop being valid. And there will forever be a increasing amount of examples of how carbon projects have been bad, and we'll keep using these to bludgeon the industry to death. And it just feels incredibly unfair. It's almost as if, like, exactly, in the car industry, every single failure that has ever existed is just used to essentially just, bludgeon the concept of vehicles, for instance. It's just nonsense. It feels so unfair.
It does.
One of the things that.
Go ahead, Luke. You go first.
All right. Quick thing, but I was just saying that I think that's one of the things that makes me most excited about the ReFi space is that it provides that sort of new tool set and that new environment for innovation and improvement. Not saying that the existing system is perfect or does not need to change or that it's completely broken, but innovation is never usually a bad thing. And with the ReFi space, we're seeing this intense amount of new energy and innovation that's hopefully going to be able to produce some very valuable tool sets that can help improve the system and overcome a lot of the existing issues that are there.
You going to say something, Sue?
Yeah, I mean, I just anecdotally, like I used to, my favorite band is Bright Eyes, and I had to stop listening to them because Connor Oberst is always just complaining. Love Connor. Hey Connor, shout out. He lives close by. If you guys know where
Really?
that is, I'll see myself. But anyway, so the whole time he's just complaining about things in society, and I'm like, this is bad for my mental health. I can't listen to this. Like, I need something more constructive. And I think John Oliver's kind of got that same kind of angle. Like, he's like, I'm liberal and I'm outraged, and like I think that's just
Yep.
like that's something that I think, especially in a time of like kind of what Rez was saying, like this is such a crisis that like for us just to be like to offer criticism and without really trying to recognize like the that this is an earnest effort to actually save us from the lifeboat. Like I don't know, I think it is irresponsible, as Rez said. That's the rest of my case.
There you go. We
Yeah.
hate John Oliver, and we think everything he does is bad.
Exactly.
It's been
Yes.
decided. No,
We will keep bringing this up as
Yeah.
an example why nothing he ever says is valid now.
I
But yeah,
I think we nailed it. My like perspective of it is like the criticisms were fair. It's not a matter of accuracy; it was a matter of proportion, right?
Yeah.
So he took a small portion of the market, he described it accurately, but then misrepresented it as if it was the entire thing. And that's the problem. It was the proportionality, because he could have spoke to how there are studies that show that in areas with thriving voluntary carbon markets, deforestation is decreased by 50+%. He could have mentioned all of the things which was mentioned in the Verra clapback, which I'll post a link to, but he didn't. So it's just a matter of selecting what he wanted to select. Last thing I want to discuss, it's actually not quote unquote a story, but it is at the same time. Verra had a date to meet with people in the space. I believe it was August. Rez, your lab. Was it the 30th?
Yes, August
okay.
30th, yes.
August 30th has come and gone. Verra to date has not, as far as I know, met with actors in the space. I think they said that they wanted to make sure that it was open to everybody. I posted a tweet saying that it was a horrendous look. We have waited for, since how long? 4 months? 5 months? And this
feels like forever.
Yeah.
In crypto time, it basically is forever.
I felt like that was a horrendous look. What are your guys' take on them not showing up, or rescheduling? Let's be more diplomatic. And what do you foresee from Verra in the future in terms of cooperating with Web3? Do you have an opinion on that?
Luke, I'll defer to you.
I can't really speak to what their motivations are or what they're thinking. I think that up until this point, they've been the dominant kind of space and voice in this VCM. I mean, in terms of nature-based solutions and nature-based projects, they dominate the voluntary carbon market. But all I can say, I guess, is just I hope that the refi space continues to mature, continues to be open to that type of collaboration, and continue to build those bridges towards being more friendly to the traditional VCM. And I hope that they start to recognize the opportunity that exists for collaboration there, because not that there's necessarily that's not being explored, or perhaps that's not being explored to the extent that certain people want. But yeah, I don't know. I just hope that we are able to kind of listen to each other and on our end as well, continue to build, right? Because this is a very new space. And I can perhaps see from their perspective how that might look, given that we're so new and that we may or may not be making claims about the industry and all that sort of stuff. So I just hope that we are able to kind of work together and continue to listen to each other. So I don't know about the commentary period, but I just hope that we are able to be open to one another and continue to develop this going forward. Because at the end of the day, right, we're all kind of on the same team with the same common mission. So it's not so much a matter of who's doing what right, but how can we both move in the same direction.
Yeah. Anything you want to add to that, Sue? That was well said. Very well said.
Very
I mean,
diplomatic.
thank you, very diplomatic. I just think like their hesitancy is one of two things. It's either that they don't think that what ReFi is doing is legitimate, or they have some kind of like capitalist, like, oh, we need to stay on top and we can't address these people because they're like a threat to us. And I think that's probably not what it is, that second part. I think it's probably the former. I hope that's not what it is, because we're in the business of saving the world. We're not in the, that should at least be the idea, not like keeping a hegemony over a market. So I think that it's probably a legitimacy thing. So all we can do is just keep being legitimate and like don't give John Oliver anything else to talk about in the meantime, like that's the key. Is I think that's what we need to recognize, is that we're kind of the underdogs in ReFi. We're new to the space, and there's been a lot of people who have taken that responsibility and done really sketchy stuff. So I think that's the takeaway, is that like if this is how Verra is seeing this, then we just need to give them, better examples to change their mind.
Yeah, so you have the approach of make sure your house is in order before you start criticizing other people, which is a saying from one of Rez's favorite internet philosophers.
No.
No, but I do like that message. I think that is an important message. Cool. Luke very diplomatically stated, I saw you disarm a troll, one of the worst trolls in the history of Zoom meetings. I have to bring this up. That's why I mentioned the name Juanita. It was absolutely fascinating. Juanita. I saw a person come into a group of 30 people yesterday and start screaming obscenities and just screaming like a crazy person. And you handled it. So I knew you were real at that moment. And I'm not even kidding, because I think that should be the test for any person of authority in any of these projects. If you can't handle a Web3 troll, what are you doing in this space? Where did you learn to handle those last question, where did you learn to handle those Web3 trolls?
It's really easy whenever they're not on camera and you can just imagine them as a screaming baby, because that's all they are, right? They're just trying to get attention. They're just trying to they're trying to use blunt force to disrupt something. So if they had meaningful contributions, then there's a place to debate that and discuss that. But honestly, I just don't place any value in that. I think that they don't earn any respect or a respectful response if they approach it in that way. So I think ignore and keep pushing forward and have a good. I mean, we just moved mediums to a place where they couldn't reach us. So it's unfortunate that is the case. But as I kind of mentioned there, like, that also provides a good contrast. That never happened to me before, but it provides a good contrast between the good people on the internet, such as the folks here, and most of the other people that are participating in good faith, and the others. And so, the more we can focus on the good, I think the better.
Little does Luke know I am like the master troll when I'm not doing this.
I'm an edgelord online. I messaged Luke after that happened, and I was like, I love living in the future. Like, there's something so funny to me about like trolling. Like, you can take the most like earnest online discussion, and then someone can just join and start screaming. Like, I find that delightful.
It's the best. Sue, you're 100% right, because in the span of 10 seconds, people were talking about DMRV, and then the next, like, literally 5 seconds later, some guy was yelling about his Willy Wonker. Like, it was incredible, man. Like, you show me one other space in which that happens regularly, and I'll give you $1 million. It's this one or it's none of them. Like,
but I think it's exactly this thing, right? I think generally people are really pissed off when this happens if they personally just take themselves a bit too seriously. And there needs to be this element of being able to, laugh at the insanity of life. Otherwise, you will go insane. Like, I'm sorry, viewers, listeners, if you are living a constant melodrama because you're taking yourself too seriously, it's not good for your mental health. Step back, learn to laugh. Laughing is good for you.
Sage advice. I thank you both for joining us. Very informative. I will leave links to OFP's website, your Discord. I know you're a Telegram guy. I'll leave a link to the Telegram. I think there's one of those as well. We will catch you all on the next one. Remember to ape responsibly. Peace, dudes and dudettes.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having us.
Thank you all.